We now follow Graham Ward into his journey as an assistant casework manager, which takes him away from day-to-day investigation roles. But the role of a casework manager, he seems as confused on that as he does on the investigator role, or at least the terms of thorough investigation and pursuing all reasonable lines of inquiry. But his description of the role sounds anything other than management. It sounds like a spreadsheet manager of two spreadsheets. And he goes to the absolutely baffling admission that the primary purpose of a casework manager isn't to actually manage any people, isn't actually to line manage investigators or their managers, but is to make the document look pretty before it gets submitted to the police or relevant authority. We'll jump straight into the inquiry.
You moved into the role of assistant casework manager in 2002.
That's correct, yeah.
Can you describe what the function of the assistant casework manager was?
From what I can recall, essentially it was to support the casework manager, and the casework manager was responsible for movement of case files, provision of management information to senior lead team on cases, and we were, from what I can recall at that point, we were kind of a focal point or a central point for the team in terms of movement of case files and so on.
So just tell us what the purpose of the role was. Of casework management.
So the purpose of casework management, as I recall, would be to monitor the progress of case files from raising a case. So you would receive, we used to have a spreadsheet that we ran for casework. We also had a spreadsheet for incidents that were reported to us across the network in the southeast region, and we would just, if there were a series of losses at a particular Crown office, we would put that together and consider raising a case. Cash centres would be similar. If there were a pattern of losses, we would raise a case. For audit losses, pension allowance fraud, as we've mentioned, was our main source of investigation at that point. I think pensions went onto card account, I think it was around 2003, so that sort of stopped at that point.
Surely, with the main focus of the work, 'cause these pension book allowances keep coming up, surely, any logic says if people really were using this as a method of stealing, that as soon as the focus of the post office seems to go predominantly onto this, that people would think, well, that's not a safe thing to do anyway, we'll get caught out. So it would just belie normal human behaviour for that to continue to happen in any case. But it does seem like by moving on to the role of casework manager, he's yet less involved in the day-to-day of the investigations, which he wasn't particularly trained for, into management and oversight of people conducting these investigations. Now, is this something that he's able to effectively do and advise on based on his experience and training?
So first of all, was it a national function?
Yes, it was, yeah.
And so did it apply to cases involving post offices in England and Wales?
Yes, it did, yeah.
Did it involve any of the devolved administrations, Scotland or Northern Ireland?
They were very much independent, so I can't remember whether we recorded the details of those cases or not.
We have heard of other managers being involved across regions, the manager who managed the North East then taking over investigations in Northern Ireland and Scotland as well. So there's clearly some cross-collaboration between there. But what's surprised is he says he's been involved in no Horizon cases involving subpostmasters, save for these ones with the pension allowances, which presumably would be subpostmasters. But even if we skirt over that point, how has he had so little involvement in cases involving Horizon and subpostmasters, when we know now in England and Wales there are countless cases being brought? If part of his job is to oversee cases being brought and investigations being run and reports being received across England and Wales, that doesn't seem to make much sense.
And I got a sense, please correct me if this is wrong, that there were essentially two parts of it. One is the management of cases that were being investigated, and the second was analysis of data to see whether an incident or an issue should be investigated.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
And did your role involve both of those things?
From what I can recall, yes.
But seemingly not. Analysis of cases already brought, because they were in the past, I'm guessing, about, if there's any patterns. Has there been a sudden increase in these cases? We suddenly seem to be dealing with an awful lot of these cases since the introduction of Horizon. Why is that? I mean, they do seem to allude to the point that maybe that following the introduction of Horizon, that actually these thefts were always happening, and actually now is the time that they've had the data to prove it, because it's less susceptible, at least in their minds, to fraud than a paper-based system.
And what did the management of the existing cases consist of? What management of a case was needed?
So when a case was raised, it would go to the investigator, and the investigator would carry out whatever investigations they deemed appropriate, which may involve interviewing, PACE interviews, etc. If that happened, reports would be written, tape summaries would be produced, and the case would then be sent to the casework manager.
And just sorry, at that stage, stopping you there,
yeah.
Did the casework manager, whether the senior person or the assistant, you, have any role to perform before the file was received in the office?
Not that I can recall, no.
Okay.
So are they just rubber stamping it? It doesn't seem that the casework manager role, as described, is doing an awful lot at the moment, apart from maintaining a couple of spreadsheets. Surely a management role involves oversight of said investigators. You would have thought that a casework manager would be line managing these people, or at least line managing the senior lead investigators and investigation managers. Otherwise, it seems like a very curious role to have, because they're not analysing data. They're basically, sounds like they're bringing in cases and rubber stamping them on the way out, as described at the moment. And he doesn't seem wholly clear on this job role that he performed. It seems similar to the investigation role, where he was mentioning that, it was important to carry out a thorough investigation, investigate all possibilities, but then struggled to explain what that actually meant him doing in practice.
You weren't overseeing, managing or supervising the conduct of the investigation?
No, that would be dealt with. I mean, the investigator was in charge of the conduct of the investigation, and their team leader would supervise.
So
monitoring.
I'm so sorry, I spoke over you.
Sorry.
Management and oversight of the investigation was conducted out of the Croydon office, is that right?
Yeah.
At a local level?
Yes.
So you were saying then the file came in, and was that essentially the trigger for involvement of the casework managers?
Exactly, yeah. And we would record all the details on the spreadsheet that we had at the time.
And what was the spreadsheet for, and what were the details?
So the details would be date the case was raised, branch involved, branch code, whether a PACE interview had happened or not.
And why were you recording that data, those data?
For information, so that it was provided upwards, so they could monitor the number of cases that were on hand, the number of interviews that were being conducted, and the progress of the case when it was passed through to the legal team.
And what?
It seems like an administrative function. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of management of anything going along here, more like a conduit for cases to be passed through, so that they can be added to a spreadsheet to pass on to some kind of management report. It would be interesting to know what was happening with that report after it left a casework manager, because clearly that would have been an opportunity to identify patterns or issues or pinch points that had been raised, massive raises in certain claims or certain issues following the introduction of Horizon.
Why was it necessary to have that information?
I don't know really. I think that was just the process that we followed.
Okay. So you recorded that information. What else, if anything, did you do with the casework file?
So the casework manager would just put a short memo in the file, just summarising that here's a case relating to pension allowance fraud. PACE interviews have been conducted, and the case is passed through to the criminal law team for their review as to whether, the case should proceed to prosecution or not.
I mean, that's not really a summary of the investigation, as we've seen from the Suzanne Winter investigation, among others. It's the investigator themselves who writes a summary of the evidence that gets passed on. That what he describes there, Graham Ward, sounds little more than a covering letter for a case, and doesn't seem just like casework management, as he describes it, was merely passing on files for prosecution that they received from investigators without any real scrutiny.
And so the casework management team was responsible physically for receiving the file,
Yeah.
and physically for passing it on to the lawyers.
Exactly, yeah.
Was any compliance check undertaken?
I can't remember when compliance came in.
There was a time.
There was a time when compliance was performed, yeah, on cases.
And what did compliance consist of?
So that was all about the structure of the case file and the uniformity of the case file, and reference to making sure that within the body of the report, if there was reference to a particular exhibit, it would be included in the right appendices envelope, and paginated, red label. It was about consistency and uniformity. And
was it about quality?
It was to drive up the standard of the case file to ensure a consistency and an accuracy in the way they were being presented. In terms of
sorry to interrupt you, the things you've listed may sound like presentational issues,
yeah,
about the right stickers and the way it's set out. What about the quality of the investigation? Was that addressed?
Yeah, it's a long time ago to remember, to be honest, but there would be, in terms of the format of the report, the structure of the report, reference to admissions made and or not, in terms of just trying to think, procedural failings, that type of thing, then we would be wanting to check that had all been covered. I can't remember whether that was actually formally part of the compliance or not.
So compliance seems to relate to formatting of the report, how it looked. Maybe this came out following the Northern Ireland case that Suzanne Winter submitted along with another investigator to the police service of Northern Ireland, who rejected it as being rubbish. But this just seems like an attempt to make a case file look good and check the bits where they should be, as in you've referenced Appendix 1 that is there, rather than actually addressing the substance and quality of the investigation itself. Well, surely any kind of compliance checks on an investigation should include the actual substance of the investigation, rather than concentrating on changing the fonts, the colours and the pagination and other things which, while they might be nice, actually don't bear any substance or relation on the actual investigation itself. It could be a totally rubbish investigation presented in a really nice looking document.
So, yeah, I can't recall.
If you had to describe the nature of the exercise that you undertook as an assistant casework manager and then the casework manager,
mm-hmm.
would you say it was more to do with procedure and process than it was to do with substance and quality of investigations?
I think that's fair, yeah.
Wow. Have we followed our own procedures? Does it have a nice little post office logo on top? We'll check all those things, but the one thing we're absolutely not going to check is the conduct of the investigation. Whether the summary, for example, includes all relevant points from the evidence. No, none of that is important, but as long as it's in post office, red and yellow, we are happy. this cannot be serious. It cannot be serious.
So would you, for example, read the investigation report, the witness statements, look at any exhibits and think, they haven't pursued this line of inquiry?
No, I think that...
Send it back.
No, I don't recall going into that level of detail. That would be more for the team leader to look at, I would have thought.
Then I'm still not seeing the point of the casework manager. Does it actually require a completely separate, well, at least titled management function to literally act as a go-between, handing a case off from one to the other? This would be another opportunity where it's a chance to have somebody who's outside of the specific investigation team leading the investigation, a third pair of eyes on it, to actually assess whether it's been done properly and whether there is anything that needs to be changed about it and pursued. It will be really interesting to see, based on the description of the role provided there by Graham Ward, whether any cases ever were sent back, or whether it was literally always just passed on, which you would presume it was if all they were doing was fixing formatting issues.
By team leader, you mean back out on the areas?
Yeah. I mean, if there was anything glaringly obvious within the case file that had been missed, if there was reference to, a witness statement and there was no witness statement within the file, then that would be highlighted. But
that's, again, a bit more process rather than substance, though, isn't it? If there's a missing document.
Yeah, it is, yeah.